All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Matteo, and I'm coming from London, from the Design, Automation, and Development team at ARUP. And today I'm going to present Speckle. So how many of you have heard of Speckle before? If you don't mind raising your hand. So there's a few. Good. So Speckle is the work of research that started from Dimitri Stefanescu at UCL, Bartlett School of Architecture, and I'm basically presenting it on his behalf. As I mentioned, Speckle started at the Bartlett, and it's funded by the InnoChain project, which is a project funded by the European Union. And there is a set of several industry partners that includes academia, engineering companies, architecture practices, and manufacturing companies as well. And as you know, technology has been, it's an enabler. And in many industries, really technology has been dissolving barriers. And as you can see, many companies have used technology to really disrupt communication and collaboration. And take, for instance, GitHub and the way it revolutionized code sharing and versioning. But at the same time, technology can create barriers. And these slides are just some examples of uses in the AEC industry, especially in which some technology that was supposed to actually enable people and facilitate communication and collaboration sometimes has actually created barriers, and it became more of a bureaucratic process than actually an act of sharing and communicating. So take, for instance, a simple, this is a stakeholder map. It looks quite simple. There are 3 stakeholders there. But if you start to look closer, it gets a bit more complicated. Each of these stakeholders has a deeper network of relationships, of other stakeholders. And if you look even closer, then each of these has their own interests and values. So that really brings to a conflict of interest in the entire life cycle of the project. And this boils down to the information. That's the real value of the project. And then each party basically structures their information in their own way, and this is not really compatible with the way the information was structured by someone else. And again, tools that have been developed that uses information, tools that embed this knowledge are completely different from each other, and they're not compatible one with the other. And this is the context in which Speckle was born. But what is Speckle? So the most basic act we can reduce communication in the design process is actually the simple act of sharing geometry and data associated with it. And this is the process in which value is generated. And Speckle was born after a series of iterations, and there's been different versions of Speckle. You can see on the top left, that was probably the first release that was a very simple web viewer. You could send geometry from Grasshopper and visualize it there. Then there were some other iterations in which Speckle was more of a parametric viewer in the web. You could send data or parts of Grasshopper definitions there and interact with it. But the last iteration of Speckle is different. Speckle is an open AEC communication platform built from the internet up. What does that mean? So let's have a look at how Speckle is set up. It's made of 3 main ingredients: API, objects, and clients. That translates to verbs, nouns, and people. And here is a sample of use Speckle inside of Grasshopper. As you can see, it's very simple. You just need to have two components, a sender and a receiver. Whatever you plug into the sender is received on the other side, and that's almost real time. And you can send geometry, you can send text, you can send numbers and other values associated with this geometry. There's no limitation to what you can do with Speckle, and Speckle doesn't really impose a specific workflow or a way of working. So that's entirely up to you, and you're free to use Speckle in the way you prefer. And you can actually let your project evolve using Speckle and see what's the best way to use it. Design to production, for instance, they're using Speckle from Rhino on very large projects. And you can see that it handles quite well even complex structures. And you can see these are two Rhino instances, and as one is modified, the other gets updated in real time. And we recently have also a Dynamo client. And this slide showing how it can interact, for instance, in Grasshopper. There are some, on the right, you can see Dynamo. There are some simple points that are being sent to Grasshopper. These are received. Then we're going to interpolate these points and create a curve, scale the curve up, and send it back to Grasshopper. It's a very simple example, but it shows how it could be used, and it lets you understand a bit more of the process. And the curve is sent back. But as I mentioned before, there's really no limitation to what you can do. This is MATTEO. He's used the Speckle viewer to create a furniture configurator in the web, just taking bits and pieces from Speckle and customizing it. This is another example. I'm not really sure what it's doing, but it's quite cool. So using Speckle within robotics and Grasshopper again. Or, for instance, Speckle could be used as a configurator in a web browser. Or a design space exploration tool. It could also be used to compare design options in real time. But not just that. So having a look at a more technical approach, everything that you send with Speckle is serialized into a stream, and that can be queried and viewed. And even from a simple web browser, you could query an endpoint that contains your Speckle stream. And just taking that looks just like random code or some random text, taking that endpoint and pasting it inside of Excel, you can get some pretty detailed analytics of your data that's been shared through Speckle. And that's using out-of-the-box Excel, no custom plugin, nothing else. Just taking your Speckle stream URL and pasting it inside of Excel. So far, the official clients and plugins for Speckle include a Rhino one, a Grasshopper and Dynamo clients. There's more on the way, so we're working on Excel and Revit and Tekla and who knows what else. Speckle is rich data, not big data, and I think this is very important because Speckle doesn't really impose a schema or a standard. Can we have a schema-agnostic interoperability platform? Yes, and it has been proved. So for those of you who know John Merchant from Geometry Gym, he has used Speckle with his own object model, so with his own schema, to send AEC files from from Grasshopper to Revit. And you can see here he's drawing a line and associating that with a grid line, and as that line moves, it updates in Revit. And this is done with out-of-the-box speckle, like with no modification. What John had to do was to create a speckle converter and add that file inside of the speckle folder, nothing else. There's other companies that have developed their own object models, and they're using them with speckle. So, for instance, Bureau Apple Engineering and Dialog have their own object models. And speckle is schema agnostic. It does have its own schema, but again, it doesn't impose it. And speckle is federated. That means that there's no such a thing as a centralized speckle server where all your data is hosted, but anybody can deploy their own speckle server, either locally on your machine or on the web, on Amazon, Azure, Google Cloud, or whatever. We are working hard on creating a deploy system that is easy to use so that everybody can install that, like a WordPress installer or something like that. And eventually, each of these instances will be able to communicate and exchange data within themselves. So, Speckle is an open community, so these are just some of the companies that joined the conversation from very early stages. But it's a growing community, and you can see the Speckle Slack channel now today has more than 300 people, of which around 100 are active and contribute. Even just submitting bugs or requests or feedback, it can be very helpful. This just shows some of the activity on the GitHub repositories. You can see there's a lot going on. And as I mentioned before, Dimitri has been the main developer behind Speckle, but there's a growing community, and some of us are here. There's me, there's Alvaro, and Rado as well has been collaborating. And hopefully some of you as well will help out with some other clients or existing ones. There is a Speckle Works organization on GitHub where all the repositories are hosted. And of course, Speckle is open source, so it's been open source from the start. You're free to use parts of it or Speckle in the way you want, for whatever reason you want, commercial or non-commercial purposes. And that's it. I hope some of the teams here will actually use Speckle or parts of it in their hackathon. Really see it as a communication platform, a transport layer for AEC data rather than just a tool. So thank you.